but you're not obliged to have the ultimate drone detection technology in place as a USSP. So hence, it begs a lot of questions, but the short answer is surveillance is most definitely the key cornerstone of U-space.
Thank you to the three. Yeah, you talk about ATM. So I would like to continue with the next question. That is, what is the main differentiator of traditional aviation surveillance system and the ones deployed in your DSDs?
Okay, so
maybe I can, go ahead.
Please. Okay, so I will refer to the specific case of ÉALÚ-AER because it's what we have been working on. And in this particular case, we have deployed this three-dimensional AESA, Optic Electronic Scan Array radar. And in this case, the main difference that we see with the traditional radars that are deployed as per now, is that, for example, these traditional radars have moving parts, whereas this kind of radar, the AESA radar, don't have it. It's more focused on scan arrays with a pencil beam. So this allows to ensure that the traffic, even in very wide angles, so very shadow angles, we can cover. So this is specific for the very low level, where indeed this traffic is expected. And also this allowed to traduce the different tracks into more short-wave base, and allow for working cooperative with other kind of radars, and allowing for, let's say, modularity, which is also key in this kind of U-space platforms. Answering to the point of Jean-Pierre, I could completely agree. There might be points where this kind of radar might be required or not, depending on the risk of the operation. In other cases, this could be as an add-on service that could be maybe not mandatory for the USSP, but required for the point of view of the specific operation risk assessment, or for the point of view of the safety of the operation.
Yes, that's correct indeed, in a sense that you could see it as some type of value-added service that the USSP could provide, for example, to critical infrastructure owners. But that's, I would say, a kind of value-added service on top of the vanilla-flavored U-space services that could be offered by USSP. But I think coming back to the original question of what are the main differentiators, I added just one. I don't want to get too technical, but one slide that shows the options that we as a USSP at least have at our availability on getting to know where our customers are. Again, it's a cooperative environment. What are the three technologies that are available? Well, first of all is the one at the bottom, which is basically a link with the telemetry. It's the drone operator sending out the telemetry data to the USSP. That's what all our test flights have been using, by the way. The alternatives that have been mentioned before is network remote ID and direct remote ID. Network remote ID is a point-to-point technology, so it goes from the drone directly to our platform, for example, while direct remote ID necessitates, it has been mentioned, a number of receivers spread around the U-space area. But the main difference that I want to highlight here that everybody should be aware of, that will come back in the e-conspicuity, the main difference with ATM surveillance is that this is all dependent technology, dependent in the sense that it depends on satellite navigation data being used. It's the drone that knows where it is using GNSS, satellite, GPS, whatever, but it's satellite based. And one of the elements that I do want to highlight in terms of redundancy, because it has been mentioned at the beginning, both direct remote ID, network remote ID, telemetry, API connections are all dependent technologies. So if GPS spoofing is going on for some strange reason, and in the current geopolitical environment, we should not underestimate that probability and the danger associated to that. One of the things that we're testing out, for example, is how can we link network remote ID, so using the mobile network to convey those GPS data, with the location-based services offered by some mobile operators, so that GNSS spoofing can to a certain degree be mitigated. So I think that's one of the main differences that we have with traditional aviation.
If you can come back on the question. For me, the difference, the main difference is separation. We don't have any definition of the separation for today, which is, I can say, the principle in the ATM domain. That is the first one. The second one is surveillance is to know where you are. And you are I completely agree with you. We depend on certain technology, and we need really to assess how far is the precision of this different technology. But if we combine all of that, we have also to take into account that we will need some fusion, not tracking, but fusion of these different sources. And not sure we have also the standards to do that and all the technology to do that. That is, for me, another things we can learn from ATC is how to fuse all this data, because depending on all this technology, by definition, we will receive some data which are not perhaps coherent, and how we manage that. And as I said before, the last step for me is the tracking. So tracking is not only to know where you are, but what you will do in the next second, for example. So based on if we refer to a flight plan, based on that, you have to know also how to include the future based on this flight plan into the tracking of your drone.
Thank you. So, yeah, I think that you mentioned some of the point about the next question, because for surveillance, of course, we have the network identification service, but also there are other system antennas that can be deployed in order to support this data, to offer redundancy. And if we talk about these other antennas, this other means to track both manned and unmanned aircraft, we move to the next question that is, I'm not, you don't need to have the clear response to that, but in your opinion, who should found, deploy, and maintain this surveillance infrastructure? And do you think that U-space can be a driver in order to promote this market adoption?
Yeah, just some quick feedback on that one. Indeed, who should fund, who should pay for it? The USSP obviously has a huge obligation in terms of knowing where manned traffic is outside controlled airspace. So the short version is, who should pay for it? Well, the USSP, since it's his legal obligation to get to know those data. But then the next question comes, how can we share those data? What is an equitable system to share those data, because they represent a certain value? Do we share that? Do we have to share that in U-space? Don't want to go too much into that debate, but there is no obligation for USSP to share those data with any other USSP. Does it make sense to do so? Yes, most probably. From a commercial point of view, yes, most probably. So there's in the funding mechanism, I think it cannot be dissociated from how would the exchange of the data occur and what is the value associated to that. Pretty much the same way as it occurs between ANSPs. Radar infrastructure is pretty costly. The exchange of those data are not just for free in all cases necessarily. So who would fund for it? Who's responsible for it? Most definitely the USSPs. For anything that is manned aviation, for getting to know where non-cooperative drones are, as I just mentioned, again, also represents a huge investment that would need to be looked upon on sharing those infrastructure. I think to a certain extent it would be the same as let the market play. If there are sufficient providers of those data, then from a commercial point of view, the sharing will go by itself, if it makes economical sense at least. But finding that equilibrium, the proof of that pudding will be in the eating, I think. So there's very little to say about the value for the time being.
Yes, I would like to do a challenge statement that today surveillance infrastructure is designed for the yesterday aircraft. No? So we require of kind of these new vehicles of tomorrow, no? the UAS and all these new players that are coming to the airspace require of more resilient and more a new kind of infrastructure that can scale the future of operation. No? So, having said this, I believe the best case for funding these surveillance systems in this case should be a mixed funding model, no? In which private entities as well as public entities, because as you very well mentioned, so in the case of the private, the USSP have the responsibility, the USSP, the commercial providers, no? And they can fund it through subscriptions or any kind of services fees. But at the same time, there should be a kind of funding from the public state, because there are critical infrastructure that we want to protect, or public safety concern. No? So therefore, there should be a mixed funding model in which there is a evaluation of who should fund what, and that those costs are shared, no? Eventually.
Yeah, agree with you. I think we need to highlight first that this part, the surveillance part, is the major part of the budget when you want to put in place a U-space. Of course, you have to put in place the other services, but more or less they can be shared for different places. Of course, by definition, I can say infrastructure is local. Okay, so that is the first point. The second point is about the non-cooperative. How far we go in this non-cooperative requirement. We know that more we want to detect everything, more costly it is. So we need to take that into account. And as you said previously, there is no obligation today. So we need to find the right balance. About the funding itself, I think, yes, there is no model for the moment. Is it public? Is it private? Is it a mix of different USSP can have in common in infrastructure and share the cost of this infrastructure? I think all of that could be done, and somewhere has to be done depending of the location you are, and depending more or less of the market you have behind. It could be perhaps if you want to promote an area for a public perspective, you can fund it. If you think in this area there is no so much traffic, perhaps different USSP can collaborate to put in place one infrastructure. And for other places, we can imagine that it's fully private and different infrastructure.
If I can maybe add one element to what was said. So I work for Skydrone. We have the ambition to become a USSP as soon as possible. We do offer drone detection services already today. So sometimes I get the question, JP, are you guys for the drones? Are you kind of a drone enabler, or are you against the drones as we offer drone detection services? My personal opinion is that I'm profoundly convinced that this market, the civil drone market, will never be any or have very little chance of growing if we don't succeed in getting rid of the bad guys, so to speak. So that awareness is not only in the interest of the public, it's also in the interest of the USSPs, because we're here, all of us, at least all the USSPs, there's one ambition that we have, and that's make the market grow. If there's no flying going on, if there's no BVLOS flights, none of us are gaining any money or earning any money. So having that market developed and making sure that the good ones can benefit without being punished by what the bad ones are doing. Because today, at least, I can tell you, in Belgium, for example, about 85% of the drone flights are non-cooperative or have not received the right flight authorization. So we gradually need to get rid of those clueless and the careless to get our market going. So it's in our common interest.
Yes, and I can add also that, yes, we need to professionalize, to have professional in front of us, and they are ready somewhere to pay more for eliminate or to remove all these bad guys, I think. And that is, I think, also the way we can proceed.
So thank you for your responses. And now I would like to also to make the audience part of this discussion. So, sorry. Okay. No, ya. Sí, sí. Pero, no, tengo aquí un hipervínculo.
Maybe I can save some time by going into the last question that we see here.
Good, claro.
It says you can never cover airspace from surface to 200 meters using primary radars. Also, remote ID receivers will always have gaps due to buildings and mountains. That backs the very important question indeed of coverage. And then we need to make a distinction again between surveillance for getting to know where the drones are versus getting to know where manned airplanes are. To kind of start with the latter, maybe getting to know where airplanes are in U-space. Of course, the surveillance technology that has been obliged is not Mode S, but ADS-B. So in terms, yes, primary radars, by the way, primary radars are non-dependent technologies. In U-space, again, the conspicuity obligation is relying on ADS-B. So you need to have ADS-B receivers and not primary radars to get to know where the airplanes are, which makes life a little bit or a lot easier compared to primary radar coverage. So that's for crewed aviation. For getting to know where the drones are, again, from a USSP perspective, it's an obligation for the USSP to agree with its customer on what technology to be used. It's U-space, airspace metadata called geographical proximity. So me as a USSP, I need to still be able to know where that drone is flying of my customer based on the technology that I agree with my customer. So again, it could be one of those three. So again, what are the coverage challenges are fundamentally different between the one technology that you use with your customer. Using as an example, coming back to the three options, using direct remote ID, if I choose as a USSP to agree with my customer that we will be using direct remote ID, it's my obligation to have sufficient number of receivers around the flight plan of the customer so that I can still guarantee to know where he is using my technology of choice. If my technology of choice is network remote ID, then it's directly dependent on the coverage of the mobile network. Hence, I would completely rely on the mobile network operator that me as a USSP am using. If it's telemetry, there's a direct link between the ground control station of the operator and my server. So what is the coverage? Well, the coverage is 100%. For as long as the operator still knows where his drone is, I know where the drone is too. So there's very much to say about coverage guarantees, but they are fundamentally different between the technologies that me as a USSP I choose to use in agreement with my customer.
And just you can mix all of that, which is come back to my previous intervention about fusion, because by definition you can fuse the different data.
Okay, so we already have some responses from the audience, so I think that more or less there is an agreement that is needed. If we have some time at the end, I will be happy to hear these people that think that is not necessary. But for the moment, I'm afraid that we have to continue with the presentation. But first, we have another question following with that, and also that we already asked to the panelists, that is, who should fund this system? Private companies and then selling data to U-space actors, so not necessarily companies inside U-space. Private U-space service provider, public-private co-funding, or directly, sorry, but here is public funding.
just a small thought. Isn't it more about getting the data instead of the infrastructure itself? Because at the end, the USSP's obligation is to have the data, how they get it. I think it can be a commercial tactic of a company to deploy infrastructure and sell data to whoever wants it as well. So no, maybe that was one of the parts that Jean-Pierre was trying to explain as well.
Yeah, also depending about what traffic we are talking about, non-cooperative, non-cooperative with good intention, non-cooperative with bad intentions. I would love to stop here, but we have to move to the next discussion. So thank you very much, everyone. Apparently there is a winner that is a public-private co-funding. I think that, that here, this is a very open solution, and I think that also this is aligned with the different traffic that you are trying to track. So depending on the purpose, the funding will be different. So now, thank you, we will continue with the technical discussion. So now we will jump with the next topic, that is e-conspicuity. It's also a wide concept, but here we would like to focus on e-conspicuity as the obligation that the manned aircraft have to be e-conspicuous when they are flying inside a U-space airspace, and they are not provided with air traffic control service by the ANSP. So e-conspicuity as a concept is very wide. It implies being seen by the others, basically, that you want to be seen by the other and you make yourself seen by the other. But here we want to be focusing the discussion about how the different projects did to integrate safely and to how they integrate and have the e-conspicuity data in the U-space airspaces that they deploy. So for that, we will have for this discussion, again, Jean-Pierre, but also we will have Luigi Bruculeri, that is the head of research and business development in D-Flight, and also Daniel García Monteavaro, that is the head of drone business development department in ÉALÚ-AER. So I will open this panel with this question: which solution and procedures from your project proved most effective for integrating manned aircraft into U-space? And here we are more focused on, U-space in uncontrolled airspace. So, Danny, do you want to start?
Okay, I will start. As you've seen before during the presentation in the demo before lunch, our solution were separated in what is called the certified signal. That, of course, is not for non-controlled space. I know that. But the solution, of course, that is most effective and more reliable, it's in controlled space, and all the information we got from the ANSP radars that we use also in non-controlled space. But as JP mentioned, the problem is the very low level, that we don't have a very low level coverage in, like, for instance, in Benidorm city, that it's in non-controlled space. So what we did was to install two specific ADSL receivers, quite affordable, not certified. Of course, there is no certification for this kind of receivers yet. And it was compatible with ADSB, ADSL, like FLARM, Pilot Aware, UAT, but it's not in Europe, but it's also compatible with UAT 970, or 978, sorry. And we got very good results. We think that the short-term solution is to rely and to demonstrate the reliability of this information. Is not the same, the integrity and the certification as a certified sensor of the ADSB, it's around 200,000 euros. the provision, the commissioning, etc., and all the maintenance. And that is not affordable for the drone environment, of course. Would be very much expensive. And with these devices, I think we got very good results. Maybe instead of having only 2, you can have perfectly 10 or 20 sensors of this, and to have some kind of monitoring. And the results were quite good. The latency it wasn't a problem, because you can adapt the timing alert of man aviation, you can adapt it to the latency. So if it's needed, you can extend the borders or the frontiers of the U-space volume in order to have some pre-alerts with the man aviations. So in a nutshell, I think we obtained very good results with these kind of sensors, and we are expecting in the future with EASA task force, or the EASA initiative of inconspicuity and iconspicuity for general aviation, and to get some results. It was also mentioned by Patricia this morning that Eurocontrol is coordinating an initiative that with different states that they are participating with no funding, only collaboration, to have some flying tests in next year in order to gather many data as possible for different inconspicuity solutions. In Spain, we'll have a place to do some flight campaigns, and well, we are expecting about these results and to evolution with this solution.
And talking about once the manned aircraft want to fly in U-space airspace, what was the solution that was implemented in Spain,
Yes,
in
okay.
U-ELCOME project?
Yes, I forgot to talk about the procedures, yes, because there is no inconspicuity solution maturity yet. And we have a problem in U-space, in non-controller space. So what can we do? Well, it is quite similar to the concept of that now Luigi will tell, but the idea is to have initially a restricted airspace, so U-space is not open under 666, so it's not enough to be conspicuous. We think that from a safety point of view, in the very beginning, you will need to have some kind of coordination with, it can be the U-space local coordinator, a centralized information system, whatever, in order to coordinate the integration of the man aviation in the U-space. Benidorm City, after talking with different stakeholders, there are only one important aviation user that can get into this city that is full of skyscrapers. And it will be the police helicopter. So the police is always going to be coordinated with the local U-space coordinator, that is the local authority. So there shouldn't be any problem, at least from the very beginning, to coordinate this kind of operations and to create a prohibited drone zone if it's needed to get into the U-space.
Okay.
So I think it's a good point to starting from a safety point of view and how it's going. That's the way we are going to start.
Luigi?
Thank you, Marina, and thank you, Dani, for explaining more or less the same situation in Italy. So for sure we are, from a technology solution, paying a lot of attention to the evolving of antennas and solution on the market. We are continuously looking at providers, no? Of tech solution providers for this kind of antennas, and obviously ADS-B is the more validated one in the years, also because at the beginning of the project only ADS-B was mature, ADSL was an idea, more or less, and mobile telephony, we can mutuate, of course, the experience of the hook-on device for network remote ID, imagine the same. Of course, we know that there is a lot to do to finish, let me say, the industry and to settle down the industry for this part, antennas and so on. And of course, as a service provider, we are the obligation to structure ourselves in order to provide the final services. The flight always goes for a step-by-step approach. So we mentioned since from the beginning that we push as much as we can to start providing services according to the availability of the market. We know that ADSB is mature. ADSL is now having the first product on the market. Mobile telephony will come. Our reference is always the regulation. So we are looking at the regulation and the way the regulation is applied. But in order to apply this step-by-step approach, of course, we, in agreement with our authority, believed that a Romeo 6700, the one we mentioned on San Salvo, is the first step to have a further level of mitigation. Also because if we can prevent the entrance in a newborn U-space airspace of a manned aviation, I think it's beneficial for everyone, not only for the drone operator that have not to behave in emergency to leave the floor, the airspace to the manned aviation, but also for the helicopter that feels more comfortable to cross a U-space airspace in this situation. So that's the balance we would like to have. Technologies are coming, and we as well try to have ADSB data from spatial, so we had several demonstrations also outside the U-ELCOME for eco-speaquity solution. So we have a satellite-based aerial data, we had ground infrastructure deploying, and as well also from the flight side, I think it's a really important business support challenge, no? to be faced, because maintaining a ground infrastructure, so our platform are not only digital platform, they are also having something to be put in some place and to maintained, and that's of course is the big part of the cost of the services, in my opinion. Thank you.
So, Jean-Pierre?
Yeah, well, if I zoom into BURDI maybe a little bit more, the discussions I just heard and make me think of again, what is the purpose of U-space in terms of integration versus segregation, and what type of residual risk are we still prepared to accept? That I think was covered in the ARA that was done in Belgium. To maybe come back to the point of segregation, not allowing manned aircraft in U-space, it sounds like segregation, sounds like dynamic airspace reconfiguration, but then in uncontrolled airspace. In my mind, it all depends on the density of traffic that you kind of expect. And let me make a distinction maybe between, and more details will be provided tomorrow, but Antwerp, so the first U-space or candidate U-space airspace, is today already a restricted area where manned aircraft have prior permission required obligation, so they have to get an authorization to enter the port area from the port authorities, by the way, not from the USSP. So the role and the mandates of a geozone, a traditional geozone manager versus a USSP begs already some questions, but that's more detail tomorrow. Zooming maybe into the three technologies, I want to be clear, and there might be misunderstanding in the minds of the people, and I don't want to get too much into the slide that is being shared here, but there's a lot of misunderstanding on what U-space econspicuity is all about, and I think we might all remember the fact that EASA did quite some effort of introducing ADS Lite, so it's kind of the light version to be econspicuous so that it doesn't too costly, but there's a huge difference between having a Mode S transponder for manned aviation versus having a Mode S extended squitter, which is ADSB out. I don't want to get into technical details, but there's no radars required. You need ADSB receivers, so we, for example, have installed some ADSB receivers. Coverage of an ADSB receiver is quite substantially different than the coverage of secondary surveillance radars, so that makes life already a little bit easier. What we have also done is we're getting radar data nevertheless from skies, since at least in Antwerp, it's very close to the control zone of Antwerp Airport. So there's sufficient, well, not sufficient, not complete coverage, but at least very good coverage already. So we get in those data. We also have made an agreement with a company called Safe Skies, which provides ADS Lite data. So both ADSL for SRD 860 as ADSL for mobile. Those guys are known for pilots flying around with their mobile phone. And we had an agreement, we just mentioned exchange of data, and it will be coming back later on. By the way, the connection we made with Safe Skies is basically based on a win-win situation. We provide them our non-cooperative detection data. It's of in their interest for manned aviation. The GA community does want to know where drones are flying, so they get that information from us. We get the information for manned aviation back from them. So that's absolutely a win-win situation. And then we fuse the data indeed. So data we get from the ATSP, data we get from our own ADSB receivers, and data we get from the ADSL community is fused into our traffic information. There's maybe one thing, and that's the next slide, and I do want to, my colleagues from Belgium are here too, but I want to zoom in into some of the particularities that exist maybe in Antwerp, but that are closely linked to e-conspicuity and that some of you might recognize. So what you see there in the center is Antwerp Harbor, which is the candidate U-space. And you see around there a 2 nautical mile buffer. Now you might wonder, JP, what's that 3 nautical mile buffer all about? Well, it comes down to the ARA. As some of you might know, it's an obligation of a USSP to be able to detect manned aviation around the flight plan that you support, which sounds logic. You need to provide that information to the drone operator sufficiently in advance. So 3 nautical mile around the flight plan that I support as a USSP, I need to be able to detect airplanes. Now, what if that flight plan is on the edge of U-space airspace? That would mean that I would need to, and let's presume we're up the north. So the flight plan that I got from my customer that I need to support is just on the edge of U-space airspace in Antwerp. So it's very close to the Dutch border, and it's very close to the edge of U-space airspace. Me as a USSP, I need to be able to detect crewed aviation 3 nautical miles out there. I'm no longer in U-space airspace. So what are the obligations for manned aviation to be e-conspicuous there? None. So me as a USSP, and I'm obliged to detect manned aviation that is non-detectable. That doesn't sound very solid. So how can we solve that? Some people might think that, well, make U-space a little bit bigger, but that doesn't solve the problem, of course. It only shifts that problem out there. So we had to come up with some ways, and my colleagues of the Belgian CEA are present here. We needed to come up with some ways of having at least some obligation for e-conspicuity the same way in U-space as there is outside U-space. Can we do that by means of a transponder mandatory zone? No. The SESAR are quite clear. Transponder mandatory zones are meant for secondary radar, secondary radar surveillance. So one of the solutions is to come up with a restricted area around U-space airspace. Some of the other ideas that were also floating around was for manned aviation to enter below 500 feet. Anyhow, you need a derogation. So if you link that derogation with an e-conspicuity obligation the same way as you have inside U-space airspace, you solve some problems. And as you might see there, that 3 nautical mile zone goes into the Netherlands. So it begs yet another question on coordination between member states on e-conspicuity. But I just wanted to highlight that in terms of complexity that some of you might not have encountered, but if you're planning on implementing U-space airspace, those are the problems that you will encounter, and that are, for the time being at least, not sufficiently covered in any AMC or any regulation, be it 664, 665 or 666.
Okay, thank you. So if we go with the, well, I think that more or less you already replied, but if you want to share other words about, without clear specification for e-conspicuity data sharing, how should regulation and industry develop consistent procedures to integrate this data? And to be shared?
Okay. I think that first of all, the industry have to provide to the regulator with a solution. So what's best that using projects are the flight campaigns, for instance, that we will have the next year in order to give that data to the regulators and to use it for new AMCs for the conspicuity solution. I'm talking about the 666. So it's quite short. I think that's my answer.
Yes, I more than focusing on the data exchange or capability of this data, I think it is simpler, let me say, as a problem. Of course, there is always a problem of harmonization and having a unique standard or something like that, but it's always the same story. I would like to take advantage of data sharing to understand who is the originator of the data and who is the consumer and who is the interested. That is a similar discussion we have done in terms of who take the infrastructure ownership and generate the data flow to the other, of course, paid or not paid, that's another issue. Of course, this will play, can be deployed in different ways. So the regulation is generic, no? Gives the possibility to SSP to take their own infrastructure, to share infrastructure, to subscribe to service by other providers. So you can model like you want. But considering the cost of this infrastructure, we have obligation to have the coverage for all the trees, for all the airspace. The coverage of antennas is not the same. So maybe a DSB have a very large coverage, and maybe you can, with a few antenna, manage. But ADSL, maybe there are smaller coverage in compared to the others, and so you need more antenna to develop. So I think it's a clue the fact that data sharing is important, also to make a mechanism that business will leverage. And maybe in addition to common service, common information, we can have also common infrastructure. So this is another thing we have to think on it. So the railways are common, and you have several operators. So it's physical infrastructure, not only information of a digital platform. Maybe the problem is if the regulation is so open, maybe you have a common investment, but you have no obligation to use the infrastructure. You can go outside the railways, no? In a certain way. So I think the way the regulation is, of course, it's open, but you can apply, like the market, several solutions, and data sharing is really important to have this dynamicity, no, in place.
Okay, thank you. So now we are going again to jump into few questions for the audience.
So, thank you, yeah, we'll see. Luigi, in that case of common infrastructure, who is intended to bear the cost of the infrastructure? The single CISP? Are you ready to do so?
So, of course,
could somebody repeat the question, maybe? I'm not sure everybody understood the question.
So I repeat. So the question to Luigi is to understand who will bear the cost for this common infrastructure, and then, as we have a single CISP in the game, will it be the single CISP that will be responsible for that common infrastructure, and then for the installation of all the necessary sensors and so on?
Yes, to be clear, the regulation is not talking about a common infrastructure. That's why I say that the regulation allow different way to approach. We said as well that surveillance infrastructure is better that is founded, co-founded, or enabling the market, like it happened in the past to put the telephony line. Now we have an open market for telephony, but 200, I don't know how many, so apologize for the timing. I don't know how long, when the telecommunication started, I think there were some funding of the infrastructure at the beginning, and then of course the market survived. So if the hypothesis, we say that more or less everyone funding, co-funding, maybe makes sense to have a common infrastructure at the beginning, and then, of course, leave the market to follow. So this, of course, can be beneficiary for not having the issue in a multiple OSSP, enabling more U-space service provider, virtual service provider, relying on a common infrastructure. Who pay this, and like who pay the others? So the problem is generic, who pay everything? Then, of course, if there is something that a member state can fund, maybe, and put as a beginning of the story, that's, of course, is beneficial for all USSPs. That's one of the principles. But focusing back on the question is, data sharing is relevant because we need to apply some mechanism of sharing of this data, for sure, in order to avoid having the proliferation of antenna everywhere in case of multiple OSSP. That's maybe creating like it happens in the telecom where there are some real service providers that have their own infrastructure, and